And so much for coming. Wonderful. So we're recording now. So if you have any questions, if we're going too fast, you can feel free to rewatch this later. And without much further ado, I want to introduce our moderator this evening, the Democratic Environmental Caucus's Russ Conn.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Appreciate having everybody here. Once again, my name is Russ Conn. I am the chair of the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida. We are here to have a panel on climate solutions for Florida. Very excited to introduce all of our speakers. Our first set of speakers, bear with me one moment. We have Representative Michael Gottlieb, Representative Jenne, Tallahassee Mayor Pro-Tem Jeremy Matlow, the Honorable Adam Hattersley, Professor Shi-Ling Hsu, Professor Jeff Van Treese, Dr. Richard Whitman, and Professor Renato Molina. Renato, right? Is that correct? Thank you. And all of the panelists can unmute themselves as they need to when they're called on. We're going to start with local issues and move forward to the state issues as we are going through. The DECF's main purpose is to elect environmentally conscious Democrats and hold elected officials accountable for good climate policy. So thank you for tuning in today. We're happy to have everybody here. We will be taking donations. Those links will be put into chat in the Facebook post. So if you like the work we're doing as you're watching this, feel free to donate to the DECF and the Sawgrass Progressives, who is our partner organization for this forum. Okay, and all right, I can do Representative Michael Gottlieb. I'm going to do short introductions. Representative Gottlieb was born and raised in Hollywood, Florida. Prior to getting involved as a public servant and running for state house, Mr. Gottlieb devoted his life to charitable causes. For many years, he and his family have been active in the MS Society, Ellipse Foundation, of Florida, and many local and national cancer charities. He mostly gave back through his service as an assistant public defender from 1993 to 1996. In 96, Mr. Gottlieb started his own criminal defense law practice, where he remains today as lead counsel in this boutique law firm. For 30 years, he has fought in criminal courts seeking justice for the wrongfully accused and for those who have committed crimes but need help finding their way and getting social and economic help to enable them to remain out of the revolving criminal justice system. The most prominent law he has passed in the Florida Legislature is Alyssa's Law, a law that places panic alarms in public schools. It was passed in the memory of Alyssa Aldhef, a victim of the shooting at Majori Stoneman Douglas High School. Representative Jenne is a Hollywood, Florida native and Florida State University alum. Jenne is a passionate and dedicated public servant. He honorably represents the people of House District 99 in the Florida Legislature, serving as a Florida State rep for over a decade. With a master's degree in public admin and demonstrable leadership skills, he served as policy chair of the caucus for 3 consecutive terms. He's currently serving as the House Democratic co-leader. His hands-on approach to community service is evident as he serves on the board of directors of the Area Agency on Aging of Broward County and sits on the board of South Florida Holocaust Education and Documentation Center. His commitment to public service is exemplified by his work as a board member of the Florida Ocean Science Institute and as a board president of the Susan B. Anthony Recovery Center for Women. He has been honored with numerous awards for his tireless dedication to dozens of organizations, including the Florida Coalition Against Sexual Violence, the Florida Library Association, Broward Young Democrats, Broward County Parent Teachers Association, the American Cancer Society, and the Fraternal Order of Police. Next up, we have City Commissioner Jeremy Matlow. He is the Tallahassee City Commissioner since his successful 2018 citywide campaign challenging business as usual. He has fought to bring more everyday people into the political process and advance the public interest for all. He serves as the chair of the Capital Regional Transportation Planning Agency and as Mayor Pro Tem. A small business owner by trade, his work on the commission has included championing renewable energy, sustainable public utilities, and responsible urban growth. Next, we have the Honorable Adam Hattersley, who has earned a BSc and MSc degrees in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan and spent 8 years as a nuclear submarine officer in the United States Navy. In honor of his father, who volunteered for a tour in Vietnam while in the Army, Adam volunteered during the height of the Iraq War and was deployed on the ground with a U.S. Army unit, receiving the Bronze Star for his service. Adam completed his Navy service as an electrical engineering instructor at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, and he moved to Riverview, Florida in 2009, where he worked for a Fortune 500 company for 7 years, relying on his data-driven background to lead a team responsible for training and managing hundreds of skilled technicians all over the world. In 2016, Adam and his wife, Christy, opened a promotions business helping other small businesses market themselves. And then in 2018, after more than a decade as a registered independent voter, he sought and won a seat in the Florida Legislature as a Democrat in a Republican district. Focusing on issues that matter to people across our community, Adam served in the Florida House, where he fought to lower healthcare costs, honor the service that veterans have made to our country, and protect public education. In June 2021, his first book, Accidental Politician, was published, and it reached the #1 spot in new releases for political leadership on Amazon. He is a member of the Selective Service Board and is an internationally certified judge for men's gymnastics. He represented the United States at competitions and events on 4 continents. All right, our professors, Shi-Ling Hsu is, and I'm gonna butcher this, D. Allenbert Professor of Law at the Florida State University College of Law, where he served as Associate Dean for Environmental Programs from 2015 to 2019. Prior to his current appointment, Professor Hsu was the Professor of Law and Associate Dean for Special Projects at the University of British Columbia Faculty of Law. He has served as an Associate Professor at the George Washington University Law School, a Senior Attorney and Economist for the Environmental Law Institute in Washington, D.C., and a Deputy City Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco. He's practiced law in the firm of Fenwick and West in Palo Alto, California. He has a BS in electrical engineering from Columbia University and a JD from Columbia Law School. He also has an MS in ecology and a PhD in agriculture and resource economics, both from the University of California, Davis. Professor Hsu has taught in the areas of environmental and natural resource law, climate change, law and economics, quantitative methods, and property. He is the author of The Case for a Carbon Tax, Getting Past Our Hangups to Effective Climate Policy, and is the co-author of Ocean and Coastal Resources Law, and is the author of the forthcoming book, Capitalism and the Environment, A Proposal to Save the Planet. Professor Jeff Van Treese, is he with us? Yes, he is, okay. Professor Van Treese is an attorney and holds a PhD in soil and water science. Jeff is a professor of business law and environmental science at Palm Beach State College. He has been published in multiple peer-reviewed journals, including Agriculture and Urban Forestry and the Florida Bar Journal. Jeff is the communications director of the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida and chair of the Palm Beach chapter of our Environmental Caucus. Dr. Richard Whitman is an internationally recognized expert on shoreline ecology and recreational water quality. He has written over 150 peer-reviewed scientific and technical publications, which have been cited in over 6,200 professional publications. He earned his MS and PhD in toxicology and aquatic ecology. Dr. Whitman worked for NASA in spacecraft sanitization, was associate professor of ecology, Indiana University, before being appointed as a National Park Service chief scientist for Indiana Dunes National Park. From 1993 until his retirement, Richard worked for the United States Geological Survey as a station manager, supervising about 20 other ecologists, technicians, and clerical staff. He is presently our state science officer of the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida. And last, but I'm sure certainly not least, Professor Renato Molina. He is an engineer and economist specializing in environmental and resource economics. His work focuses on topics at the intersection between game theory, sustainability, and institutional settings. He holds a position as assistant professor in environmental and resource economics at the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science and the Miami Herbert Business School at the University of Miami. He is also a faculty scholar at the Abbess Center for Ecological Science and Policy at the University of Miami and a visiting scholar at the Faculty of Natural Resources at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valsperio in Chile. Can you correct me on that if I did that too bad?
Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso.
Thank you so much for that correction. He asked me to quote him as follows. Broadly, my research explores the economics of natural resource extraction, conservation, and natural disasters. Some of my projects involve the role of common property regimes in the economic impact of natural disasters. The use of conservation strategies to control for competitive incentives in the commons and establishing the environmental cost of criminal activities in the ocean. In addition, I'm also involved in collaborative efforts studying political incentives for conservation, the economics of transboundary natural resources, the willingness to pay for hurricane forecasts, and the relationships between environmental variability, risk preference, and institutional regimes for the extraction of renewable resources. The core of his work, however, or the core of my work, however, relies on using economic insight to inform responsible policymaking for environmental and natural resource management. Thank you to all of the panelists for attending. We appreciate having you on. We have some formatted questions that we have received in advance that we're going to start through. The first question is going to revolve around individual actions. We're going to go to the county actions or the municipal actions and then go to state level actions for this. So the first question is directed to Dr. Van Treese. What are some of the steps individuals can take to reduce water pollution and conserve water resources?
Thank you so much, Russ, for that. So there's a few things that you can do, but I think that one of the things that is probably the easiest thing that anyone can do is to plant native trees, use native plants, right? So, and to have utilize sustainable landscaping that conserves water resources, right? So things that don't require a lot of water, right? So we sometimes call that xeriscaping. And this can be done through the use of using natives and potentially even alternatives to alternative ground covers to the St. Augustine grass sod, which is way overused in the state of Florida. So some simple things like that that can conserve using rain shutoff devices, I think is a really good way for individuals to conserve water, although we still have to keep in mind that a lot of the vast majority of water usage is at the agricultural and industrial level. And so while we definitely want to encourage individual action, really it has to be done on a policy level to have really widespread change.
Thank you, Professor Van Treese. As far as the other panelists, any of you can raise your hand and respond. We can do a little bit of back and forth on any of these questions. But I have the next kind of point with Dr. Whitman is what steps can be taken to mitigate the ecological damage climate change is doing to our beaches and our wildlife. And anybody, as after you unmute, we can go back and forth.
Okay, there we go. Well, I think you need to take the realization that ecosystems and species have spent tens of thousands of years adapting to the present equilibrium that we currently have, that's been superimposed on the stressors that humans have squeezed on them. I mean, things like, and probably the largest is habitat loss. Habitat loss is probably responsible for the majority of endangered and threatened species and losses. That coupled with fragmentation, where we lose population continuity, degradation of the environment, invasive species, pathogens, parasites, pollutants, competition, exploitation, the stressors are numerous. So the question is, how do we deal with this? And this is not something new for scientists. We've been with increasingly earnestness trying to come up with adaptive management strategies. That's a code for managers to deal with the changing environment and the ecosystems and species that we're dealing with. In Florida, we're really lucky to have large refugia like the Everglades in our coastal protected areas. and coral reefs, that not only at the federal but state, local level. What can we do? We can provide corridors for species escape from sea level rises and temperature changes, reduce the barriers. And we have to look at it at a variety of levels. We have to look at a species that's not standalone, operates in an ecosystem, and whether it's the structural, hydrological productivity, the habitat, the individual species, or the physiology. And what we try to do is look at this adaptive management from impact assessment, what the vulnerability running through different scenarios at the system level, adaptive planning, again, assessing this uncertainty and the response, and then research and monitoring. So that's what we're doing, and a huge army of people worldwide are working on these mitigation approaches.
Thank you, Dr. Richard, Dr. Whitman. I appreciated the comment about the toll roads. I'd love to hear some of our elected officials add to that and what the legislature kind of, where that stood, because that definitely affects all of the state and the ecological diversity. Would any of the electeds, and I'm having a little bit of display issues with my Zoom. I apologize. I'm trying to get that back up. Lisa, can you take over?
Yeah. Yeah, so
I can't unpin or any of that right now.
okay. So I guess I'll just go to the Honorable Adam Hattersley. Do you think we would have seen such a dramatic die-off of manatees in the past year if the legislature had passed your Florida Endangered and Threatened Species Act?
No, I don't think we would have seen this extreme die-off. Right now, we're tied to the federal government and the EPA, and basically to the whims of whoever is in the White House. Donald Trump's two administrators for the EPA were both climate change deniers, and the first one, in fact, had made his chops by suing the EPA about 14 times when he was the Attorney General of Texas. He also made a very controversial decision in 2017 upon taking office to lower the protection level of especially the Florida manatee from endangered to threatened. By being tied to the federal government, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. We can't protect the species as we see fit as a state. And we're, like I said, we're stuck to those political whims of DC. So if we had been able to pass legislation like that, which would have given Florida the power ourselves to determine what level of protection we want to give our specific endangered species, we would have, I feel, been much more successful this year at protecting our especially critically endangered animals like the Florida panther and the Florida manatee. So yeah, I think we would have been able to do a lot better job. You know, just one of the problems, not just that we see federally, but here in the state, is we keep electing people that rather look at their personal pocketbook in the next quarter than instead of taking a long-term view of where the state is going and what's going to be good for everybody, not just our environment, but our economy as well, 5, 10, 20 years down the line. So we need to start electing some more forward-thinking people who are more concerned about where they live and how they live instead of just their own home, like, you know, their own personal house, but their entire community. So we need to change our behaviors there before we're going to see any success legislatively.
I think that's absolutely right. Which kind of brings us to you, Professor Molina. What do you think the most cost-effective way to protect endangered and threatened species is?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I think to answer it, we have to be clear about what cost-effective means, right? So cost-effective basically is the way in which achieve a certain goal in the least costly way, right? And in this case, I think when we're talking about conservation, there are misconceptions about what it means to conserve a species, right? Does it mean to actually ensure the survival of the species, the thriving of the species, or just maybe secure the habitat of the species, right? And coming up with a clear answer for all those questions, it's sometimes, you know, not as straightforward when it comes to the bureaucracy that is instituted, especially, for instance, when someone was talking about the Endangered Species Act, many of the actions are related to habitat, but it doesn't really necessarily, you know, like targets the most optimal habitat. And also many of the criteria that are set in order to, for instance, stop development and protect habitat are not really aimed towards maximizing, you know, like the probability of survival of the species, but just to protect habitat, and then, you know, keep controlling until you go back to an unthreatened status. So I think the most cost-effective way to achieve, you know, a thriving environment, and that implies the species that inhabit it, I think relies on finding common ground for win-win scenarios in which private actors that have self-interest basically align with other individuals or are trying to protect certain species. So for instance, in the case of Florida, if you're trying to create habitat corridors, we need to find space for individuals that have land and are willing to sell it or donate it for conservation, finding a room to talk with all the parties that are interested in conserving these species and also providing these habitat corridors. I think that's where the key is, and that's where basically most of my research also relies, trying to identify prices type of relationship, trying to identify circumstances in which we can connect these people and create win-win scenarios that result, you know, in a limited amount of conflict.
Wonderful. Professor Hsu, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I second everything that's been said, but I definitely want to go back to Dr. Whitman's comments about habitat loss. 96% of the species that are listed as either threatened or endangered on the federal list under the Endangered Species Act are there at least in large part because of habitat loss. So, you know, what could we do in Florida? We can do the sort of things that we can stop doing the sort of things we do in Florida that erode that habitat. A couple of things have already been mentioned, but I think I've lived in several states before, but the Home Builders Association has just enormous disproportionate power in this state. They flex their muscle in so many different contexts when it comes to water pollution, when it comes to kind of the state procedure for kind of dividing up the amount of pollution allowed of each sectors. They almost always get exactly what they want. So I agree. I want to second Representative Hattersley's comment. We just have to elect people that have a different view of home building in the state of Florida. And just a quick thing to add that people don't talk about a lot, and actually something that Republicans in Florida, as I understand it, are working constructively on. We need to do something about invasive species. That is low-hanging fruit, to be able to stop the import of things like Burmese pythons and lionfish. That's something we could do easily and would have a big payoff ecologically.
Yeah, absolutely. The number of invasive species that have taken over Florida is it's a lot. So Councilman Matlow, how can local governments use building codes and design standards in their transition to net zero?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having us all on today, and thanks for keeping this conversation at the forefront. We know when the community is talking about it, it's a lot easier for elected officials to push initiatives forward. So what can we do locally with design codes? I'm usually hesitant to say what we can do locally because in the state of Florida, anytime you do something positive for the environment, the state government likes to come and preempt it and take away that authority from our local governments the next year. But I think there's a lot we can do locally. First, just looking at our building codes. I think we start with our publicly built buildings. There's lots of environmental certifications from LEEDs to other things that we can look into. But I think we first take the lead in the buildings that we're building as a government, and then we look to the codes that we ask of the private sector when we look at the HVAC units that we require to be installed, the building materials that we require to be used, because a lot of the times the conversation wraps around transitioning to renewable energies, but a huge part of that is obviously the reduction piece and how we reduce the need for some of these energies, especially in peak demand. And then I think also looking locally at our comprehensive plans and just how we're developing in general. Are we taking into consideration our transit patterns? Are we pushing for walkability, or are we pushing for more urban sprawl that's going to require more energy? I think that's the big battle we're having in the city of Tallahassee right now. I worked on the CRTPA Regional Transportation Planning Agency to pass a resolution encouraging the legislature to deny the toll roads that were crisscrossing the state. But we also see roads right here in our city that are having the same sort of impact, that are going to could harm our environment and really create a city that's not what we want to see for our children, that doesn't encourage walkability and having your residents nearby where you work, and all of those things that we know create a better environment, but also a more enjoyable place to live. I see a lot of our local advocates, Steve Bean, Dan Hendrickson, Ken Hayes, Maida Calder, from Tallahassee, who have been strong advocates pushing our local government to do better and make better decisions. I appreciate them being here today, and I really look forward to diving into the conversation about our clean energy plan that we were able to pass in Tallahassee, and how we can do more going forward.
Thank you.
So I'll just continue to moderate while Russ is having fun with echo chambers. Professor Hsu, what is the difference between net zero and true zero in reference to carbon emissions? And is true zero something that's feasible for the future?
I'm not sure. I'm usually kind of careful when it comes to terms like true zero and net zero. Literally speaking, we'll never get to truly true zero, because even if we have a system that runs only on renewable energy, let's say, we still had to do something to construct all of that infrastructure and facilities that run a true zero thing. But I don't think it's worth kind of thinking about those terms as much as it is thinking about exactly what it is we're doing to try and make it net zero, because there are some good projects that get us to net zero and some projects that don't get us to net zero that are really just frauds. I think it's really worth looking at what it is. So for example, a net zero project might be when you fly on an airplane and you want to offset your emissions, you could donate a little bit of money, and I suppose Delta Airlines would contribute that money to try and get some things done that otherwise wouldn't be done, that would reduce emissions. There are some projects that are not very good that fall under that category. There are some projects that are worth doing. And for me, I'd love to see some projects that would, for example, pay farmers to avoid tilling their soil, to get them to adopt a low carbon method of farming. And by the way, also less polluting for our waterways. I would like to see net projects that would pay for the capture of landfill gas, that would fund that. A lot of local governments would love to capture the landfill gas and thereby avoid contributing to climate change, but maybe the money just isn't there. So, I guess my view is there's good net zero and there's bad net zero. What's really worth looking at is exactly what's being accomplished and whether or not it's money well spent in trying to reduce emissions and get people to do things to reduce their carbon footprint.
And I think we're all Democrats on this panel. Is there a specific form of tax incentive that you
Oh,
were looking
well,
at?
I mean, I wrote, thank you for helping me promote my book. I wrote a book 10 years ago now on a carbon tax. That's something that we could do. I guess that would help us reduce our emissions. I've always said that we should have a carbon tax at the federal level. I think we should have a carbon tax at the state level. We'll have to lose a lot of Republicans before we have something like that. But we could tax people on carbon dioxide emissions, take that money and give it back in a way that is progressive, that helps the most vulnerable among us. We could spend that money on resilience in the state of Florida. There's a lot of things you could do with a carbon tax just in the state of Florida. We could also reduce sales taxes to try and make this revenue neutral, to try and make sure that people get money back as well as pay for a bigger carbon footprint. So thanks for mentioning that. I guess in terms of net zero and true zero, taxing is part of it. It's actually kind of the opposite, the other side of the coin. It's kind of paying people to do things that we otherwise might not see them do. But taxing is also important, I think, in producing the incentives for people to do the right thing.
And is my audio back? I'm good. Everybody can hear me? Good. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lisa. I think that's a very good point, Professor Hsu. There are incentives like taxing or charging a fee for plastic bags at the local level. Like, DC taxed the cost of a plastic bag by a penny or a quarter or a nickel to start changing consumer behavior. Because part of a lot of these climate solutions, from my perspective, is you have to get the consumers to want to change the elected's opinions. So you need that aspect to incentivize. Democrats don't necessarily want to raise taxes, but we want to offer services. And that needs to be done in a responsible, environmentally friendly way. I did want to go back, if I could, to discuss the Ready for 100 out of Tallahassee that Mayor Pro-Tem Matlow, I believe you passed a version of that in the last couple of years. Hillsborough County just passed a version of that after the legislature took some actions. And I wanted, if you could, to speak on that, and maybe the other electeds could speak on it as well, about what happened in Tallahassee in regards to that bill.
Well, I'll start with what we've accomplished in Tallahassee, and then I'll let the others fill in what's happened across the state and the state government. But in 2019, we passed a clean energy plan to completely transition our community to 100% renewable energy by the year 2050. And the big topic of conversation then was we need to do this quicker, and there was a lot of push to do it quicker. So we did include in the planning process to bring back options for 2035 and sooner dates to see the feasibility and the cost structures of those. So in Tallahassee, I think we're very fortunate to have a public-owned utility as opposed to an investor-owned utility, because we're really in the driving seat, and it's really a community-driven decision. And what we know, at least in the city of Tallahassee, is our constituencies and the people who live here really want to see this happen. They're worried about the effects of climate change, and they want to see what we can do locally to address it. So that planning process is currently underway with an integrated resource plan. We're looking at transitioning our entire fleet and our bus systems to electric powered by 2035, as well as all of our city-owned facilities. So it was a huge community push to make it happen. A lot of the players you see showed up to push back on it, and there was a lot of tugging back and forth to really get something across the finish line and start planning for it. I know many communities across Florida would like to do the same thing, and as I said earlier, our biggest obstacle is a state government that refuses to respect the will of its people. We've seen constitutional amendments that try to subvert these, sneaky amendments like Amendment 1 and 2016 that are really aimed, are being pushed by these large investor-owned utilities that really just have too much influence in the state of Florida. So I think the pushes can start locally, but at the end of the day, it really needs to be federal action that needs to be taken to really get our world going in the proper direction. But we're happy to do what we've been able to do in Tallahassee and look forward to doing more.
Thank you. Representative Gottlieb or Representative Jenne, would you like to comment on the state of Tallahassee in regards to I think it was Senator Hudson's bill that prohibited municipals and local governments from acting on clean energy?
Yeah, no, look, and not to make too broad of a point, but that's really the main problem that we have in the legislature right now, is that the environment is clearly, in any environmental cause, whether you're talking about sea level change, sea level rise, climate change, whether you're talking about invasive species, being run into extinction. Whenever you're talking about any of these, the big pushback and the big mountain that we have to try to find a way to get around or up and over is the influence of corporate money in the state, because it's much easier for a corporation to spend a well-placed $1,000, $10,000, $50,000 than have to do $1 million in retrofit. So their lobbying becomes much, much more important at that given point in time. But by having that in place, what you're seeing now, you're seeing cities like Tallahassee and Mayor Matlow. You're seeing cities like Hollywood, a lot of coastal cities, a lot of coastal counties trying to step up and do something because the state legislature will not act. And because of that, you saw a bill like that. We see it happen time and time again. A local community makes a decision on their own. It interferes with what Tallahassee wants to see, and that will immediately become outlawed somehow. We will take another tool away from every municipality and county in this state just to make a few corporate donors that much happier. And that's what you've seen time and time again in Tallahassee. I know later we're going to be talking a little bit about HB 81 this year, last year's HB 283 by Representative Anna Escamani to deal with renewable energy. That's a bill that just cannot get a hearing. Why? Couldn't tell you the answer, but the specific answer. But at the end of the day, it is because of the influence of large donors giving huge amounts of money to people and really subverting the will of the state of Florida. I think if you polled the state of Florida, you would overwhelmingly find that the citizens of this state, whether they be progressive, in the middle of the road, or conservative, want a clean environment. But there's some disconnect there when they don't realize, because these little tiny programs will pop up and say, see, look, we're doing something to help the environment. But in reality, you're just putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds at this point.
Thank you. Rep. Gottlieb, do you have anything to add to that?
Russ, thanks for having me here. And, the answer is no, I really can't add to that. Leader Jenne is 100% correct, as are all the other speakers that we've heard today. I think, the biggest issue is we're going to see a tremendous amount of preemption in this next coming session. And a lot of that has to do with, what we've seen in terms of vaccines and whatnot. And I know that that's not relevant to the environmental aspects here, but when we're talking about local governments and home rule and the ability, I think Evan touched on it when he was talking about the Keys and them outlawing certain kinds of sunscreen, and the Keys wanted to outlaw not having certain cruise ships come. You see the state coming in because there's big companies that are paying for certain legislation to move in a specific direction. And the problem is that our conscience as a legislative body is not where the voters really have us. So we're not speaking for our voters up there. And the problem is, at least in the last legislative session, it was 78-42. And I'm not saying that all the Republicans are anti-environment, but I think the lobbyists have too much influence on how we vote. And my concern, and the question that I would ask really, because I'm no I'm no subject matter expert, but I think the question for, all the individuals that are talking to us who are subject matter experts, is it too late to change our course? Because we're hearing great suggestions, about how we change our farming, how we build homes, so on and so forth. But have we passed the point where really all we're doing is talking and we're never going to make any effective change? That would be a question that I would ask.
And I think that is a very good point. And I only see personally two solutions to that. Is one, vote them out, or get them on board, environment over party, and just country over party, environment over party, to get these representatives. If citizens that are here watching, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, contact your representatives and primary, get a different Republican that will vote on environment from that perspective, if that's what it is. If it's gerrymandered, well, you can get a better Republican there, right? The other item that I think we can do instead of talking is get get DC. If Tallahassee is going to preempt us locally, well, then DC should be able to preempt Tallahassee, right? Let's go to our big brothers and our big sisters if they're going to end up being bullies. I'll leave it open if you guys want to keep commenting, or we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, and I will say this, just Russ, real quick, just to follow up on what you just said. And that's the thing, that's one of the major disconnects that I've always had had during my time in the legislature. I was in the legislature for the entire run of President Barack Obama. The wailing and gnashing of teeth that came out of the Florida House of Representatives every time the federal government said, nope, states, this is how we're going to do this now. It is this weird cyclical violence that, because they've been told what to do, it's almost as if they feel as if entitled now to tell local municipal and county governments what they have to do. But Rep. Gottlieb's absolutely spot on with his comments.
Yeah, I think you're giving the Republicans too much credit for saying that they needed to be prompted to feel that way. They've been running over the will of the citizens of Florida for much longer. We passed our Florida Forever funding, at the very early term of Barack Obama, or maybe even just before it. And so it's been a long time going with this destruction of home rule, I feel.
So, mind if I chime in?
Please.
See, now Rep. Gottlieb and Rep. Jenne are still in the House, so they have to guard what they say a little bit. I'm not anymore, so I can kind of tell the truth a little bit. You mentioned, for example, if there are Republicans who are anti-environment, then primary them and get a good Republican. I put that in quotes.
Well said, because it is.
Well, when I ran for the state house, and I don't know what Mike and Evan saw, but every single candidate on the Republican side came up with new ideas, and don't worry, I won't be that guy, I won't be that typical Republican, but every single one of them, to a person, folded under the pressure of the speaker to vote exactly as told. So it's not just get a better Republican, because that's not going to exist in the legislature. And I know this is going to frustrate people, but I'm going to try to be realistic and tell you exactly what is happening. In the last couple legislative sessions, there have been 0 bills that have failed on the House floor. It is political theater. Somebody has a comment in there: the citizens of Florida want pro-environment measures, and the Republican-dominated legislature won't deliver. Shouldn't you all be designing and promoting constitutional amendment petitions to give the voters the ability to decide? Absolutely. However, as Russ, you mentioned, the Florida Forever Amendment, those funds get swept every year. Amendment 4 from a couple of years ago, the legislature basically wiped it out with the enacting legislation. We just passed a minimum wage amendment, which I don't really see how the Republicans are going to let that happen. Not only that, but the Republican legislature last session made it more difficult to get approved and on the ballot any citizen-led constitutional amendment. We have to change our behavior at the ballot box until we get a Democratic majority in the House or the Senate or in the governor's mansion, something. We make a change from the past 20 years, we will not see a change on these issues. We have to get out there and vote.
Thank you very much, because that is the purpose of our organizations, is to change the legislature so that way we can actually get citizens' input into our policies. And thank you for speaking truth to power. I totally respect the representatives that are currently in office because they want to get some bills passed this cycle. And I know you suffered during your time because you spoke truth to power while you were in office, and it was very, very painful. So,
yeah, well, there's not too many reps that are up there. I know Rep Gottlieb and Rep Jenne. There are only a few of us up there for the actual right reasons of trying to do the right thing. And Rep Gottlieb and Rep Jenne wouldn't be on this call if they weren't in that group, the small group.
Yeah, I can tell you, Russ, I could care less. I mean, they prostitute themselves at every turn. It's the way it goes there. I can't be too much clearer than that. I mean, it is for sale. There are a lot of things for sale. And unfortunately, right now, with the current crop of 160 legislators, the majority of those people don't give a damn about anything except getting themselves reelected again. And you can't get yourself reelected without money. And who's got money? And you just follow that path. And everyone on this call, on the panel, and I know I see some of the names of the people that are watching us, and if everyone's as smart as those names, yeah, you know that you follow that path. It's to its logical conclusion. It's not a happy place.
And I'm just going to take a moment to hop in because Russ and I run organizations that work on removing some Republicans from the state legislature so we can pass climate solutions. If you haven't donated to our organizations yet, I'm putting the link to do that now. We need resources if we want to change the tide here. That's my drumbeat forever.
Thank you so much. And it's true, because ultimately, if you can donate, if you can volunteer, if you can work a campaign, get trained up, or potentially even run yourselves, you're going to be doing the citizenry of Florida a huge service and favor to help get them out.
And I know running is a scary proposition. A lot of us who have run, it's a really difficult decision, and there's a lot of things involved with it that are unknown. And I'm going to do a shameless plug here too. That's why I wrote this fun book called Accidental Politician. Talked about my 2018 successful campaign, how to win on a shoestring budget in a Republican district, and just to break the ice a little bit on what a campaign is like. It is a scary thing, and it should be, because it's a difficult thing, but it's an important thing. And if you are considering running, I would encourage you to do so. Yeah,
and that book is a page turner. I haven't finished the whole thing, but it is very good, and thank you for the copy. All right, so moving on, outside of Republicans turning into Democrats, what legislation do you think we can get passed this session? Obviously, there is a climate emergency. Even if it's small steps, what do you think we can accomplish this cycle, if anything?
It's interesting. We've been battling there. I'm not really certain. I'm part of, in Broward County, a local structural issues committee. So I think, because of what we saw happen in Dade County with the collapse of the Champlain Towers, we're possibly going to see a revision to the building code as it relates to sea level rise, as it relates to communities that are at risk. So and that's going to be couched as progressive, environmental friendly legislation instead of a real true measure. Evan may have a better handle on what legislation has been passed or may be repeated, but I think he said it before when we talked about 283. I mean, it never got a hearing. And maybe it's because it's trying to get us to net zero, as we were talking about, by 2030 or 2035. It might not seem practical. He said it before, they don't want to get voted out of office. So I don't know that you're really going to see anything that is effective, true change. It's going to be things that we can talk about as a legislative body. Hey, we did this, but we really didn't move the needle. So I don't know that there's a true answer to your question, Russ.
Yeah, and one other thing, Russ, if I can, just for a half second, you got to remember, I mean, they would not talk about the environment the first 12 years I was going up there. It's only been lately, and really we're only focused on, when you see the legislation that's actually moving, it's resiliency. It's not addressing any of the root causes. We need resiliency as part of the package. Please understand that as somebody who represents a coastal community. But we need resiliency as part of the package. But if you just make it not just the centerpiece, but all of your environmental thrust, it's not going to end well for anyone.
Yeah, I think that's a good way for people to understand how Tallahassee works. There's a lot of bills that you can get riders on, and if you frame it a certain way, one of the things I think we as citizens need to be talking about is value-based messaging, understanding where the more conservative view is on these conversations, because we have an economic argument to make, I think, on an environmental perspective. You know, this is smart money planning ahead, because either way, when we message, we need to make it clear that one way or the other, the taxes are going to go up, the costs are going to go up, whether it's your insurance on your flood insurance, whether it's additional hurricanes and your citizens that you can't even get insurance for your homeowner's insurance. We're paying the cost as citizens already, and they will continue to increase. So I think changing this, instead of an environmental argument, which is obviously it is, but the economic argument that conservatives can understand, that it's smart money to invest in our resiliency, in our way of life, in our reduction of greenhouse gases. If either of the professors want to add in onto that economic argument, that would be awesome. And I think, Matlow, you might in local government have some perspective on that as well.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that because I mean, the short answer, I think, is what can be accomplished this year in Florida is not enough. You know, we're not positioned to be able to do that. You know, we can try to work with Republicans as well as we can, but I mean, the truth of the matter is the urgency of the crisis doesn't support that. I think the best path we have, which you mentioned earlier, is looking to the federal government, because we're talking about Republicans versus Democrats. But we also know not all Democrats are on board with pushing this forward. We know lots of Democrats that are being funded by utility interests that are really throwing up roadblocks and that sort of thing. But I think the biggest action will have to come from the federal government, and we're uniquely positioned right now to be able to do it. So from the state of Florida, I think all of our pressure should be on those federal officials in Washington, D.C., because they can really take more meaningful action this year that would take 40 years for us to accomplish in the state of Florida. So I think we can start to flip our state blue. I think we will eventually flip our state blue. But when we talk about what we need to accomplish, the stakes are just so high and the time frame is so short that I think we just have to be super focused on where we can get the most change in the quickest possible.
Thank you. Professor Molina, I think you had raised your hand for a comment, and then we'll go to Jeff or Dr. Van Treese.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely agree with you that there is a need for not only the general public, but also the representatives, the elected officials, to internalize, you know, like what's going on and what are the potential damages. The problem here with climate change, for instance, is that the damages do not really coincide with the political cycle. So when you're facing a problem that basically is going to give you problems that don't get realized within 4 years, and most of the like big problems are basically going to come 20 years down the road, there's not really an incentive for politicians to actually do anything. So all of that responsibility, I think, falls on the general public. And the good thing here is that the general public does realize its damages. So for instance, there's plenty of research that shows that whenever you install adaptation structure, that realization basically results in high property value, which means the public already knows that protecting your house against, you know, like the environmental hazards does has a benefit, and they're willing to pay for it. That tells you already that the public is not oblivious to the fact that, you know, investing in resiliency is actually valuable. And I guess now what we have is a problem in coordination. Most of the people are aware of climate change. Most of the people actually accept it's real and that damages are important to be controlled at some point in the future. What we have right now is just a problem of motivation and kind of like unify this vision. And at least I'm hopeful that the public is actually able to organize themselves in order to solve these problems. And very quickly, I can give you one example, for instance, that I was recently exposed to in Montana, where a lodging bid was coming, and like the regular lodging company basically made up a general bid, but some residents that wanted that forest preserved basically organized themselves and actually outbid the logging company. So it's just one example where the actual public, when they get together, when they share a common vision and they actually try to channel that interest towards conservation or resilience or whatever it might be, like you can actually promote change. So yes, the damages do not align with the political cycle, but I do think there is potential in order to like create change.
Thank you. Professor Van Treese and then Professor Hsu.
Well, Professor Molina took the words right out of my mouth. I was right about to say what he had just said, but I would add to that in terms of the long-term effect always being ignored with the political cycle is if we were to draw an analogy with education, and we have some educators on here, if you were to think of, for example, what is the economic significance of whether elementary school children learn long division, right? It's enormous, but it's something that will not be felt for decades, right? So it's something that's why consistently educate, we have very much troubled education policy. Same thing with infrastructure as well. And the same thing, what we've seen with being totally unprepared for a pandemic. When it hit us last year, we were totally unprepared. We couldn't, the richest country in the world, we couldn't make PPE fast enough. There's so many analogies like this. And this is where, it's very difficult to get widespread popular support because most people are living paycheck to paycheck. But that's why this grassroots movement is so important. But I think that it is just a very, I don't want to say sad commentary, but realistic commentary that the political cycle just does not coincide with any long-term goal or mitigation of long-term crisis. And I think that's where we have to pressure our leaders to do something through external pressure. Thank you.
If I could chime in, that sounded like pretty awesome improvisation by Professor Van Treese, because it sounded like he wanted to say something else, but it makes me think. I was going to say something else entirely, but your comments made me think about something else, about the value of education and the long-term payoffs. That's something we could do in Florida that doesn't sound environmental, but I think it actually is, I look at what my kids are learning in school, and their teachers don't actually shy away from climate change in teaching, my middle schooler and my high school about the impacts of climate change. And I think there's just kind of more acceptance, even in school, even in secondary school, about science and climate change and kind of the things we have to do to protect the environment. One of the things that I always feel like we've underemphasized here in the state of Florida is the value of education. If you looked at the contribution to gross domestic product in the United States, the value of education is about 10 to 16 times that of the value of all of the other physical assets, power plants, roads, steel mills, cement plants, everything physical that makes economic prosperity. Education is about 10 to 16 times more valuable. Why don't we spend more money on secondary schools and on universities? That's a little self-serving because I forget a university. But I think the payoffs for the environment are going to be really profound. Now, the little thing I was going to say before about smart money, I don't for a moment doubt the threat to democracy posed by corporations, but I think there's something else that is also very troubling. It might even trouble me even more, and it's that I think there are Republicans that don't want to listen to what smart money is anymore. I think about the governor's no vaccine passport stand and his kind of destructive standoff with Norwegian cruise lines. That's not smart money by any measure. It is playing to his base, as is the schools can't have mask mandates. It's playing to a base. There's nothing smart money about all of that. I think there are a crop of Republicans that won't even look at short-term economic best interests, that just have a certain set of warped values that they think they can effectuate in public policy. Now, I'm not one of the electeds here, so I don't spend my time with these people, but I kind of compare what's happening in Florida with what's happening in some other kind of red, but still not very, very red states. And what I find is really troubling, because this is an attack on just facts, reason, analysis, and rationality. And we could fight that with education. We could fight that with introducing new values like education and enlightenment.
I think you're making a good point, because there are at times a lack of focus on the financial side of things, because they are getting donations. As previously mentioned, they're getting bought out by some of these big dollar donors that isn't even good for their communities. And I think one of the things we can do as citizens to hold them, at least we can get our pound of flesh. If we can't beat them, we can at least make them less profitable. Because if taking these extra free dollars from these developers or from these lobbied interests, if we can hold them accountable, these elected officials accountable for that, and bring up that awareness, it will cost them as much to fix their PR problem that they're going to have. So I think as activists, even if we can't win a seat in a cycle, or we're not sure we can, by doing the work, we are getting a pound of flesh, if you will, and making it less economically beneficial for those bad representatives to get away with it. And I think that's part of the staying actively engaged with your representatives prior, during their term of office, because those actions that they take has dramatic effects. And if they're not held accountable while they're in office, they won't be accountable at the ballot box. So I think that is a good takeaway on that point. Lisa, do we have time for HB 283, or should we go to audience questions at this point?
I think we should go to questions. We have a few lined up. I have one that was sent in outside of the chat. Can we start with that?
I'll start with that. Okay, so I do want to thank Representative Gottlieb. He did have to leave us at 7 p.m. Thank you so much to him for attending with us. He had already previously told us that he had a conflict with another scheduled meeting. So if you have, we're taking audience questions at this point, and these questions can be directed to a specific panelist or to whoever wants to answer. Please send in the Q&A section to ask your questions. We'll start with Mike from Cape Canaveral asked, what sort of legislation will be introduced to limit pollution caused by corporations such as dumping and emitting greenhouse gases?
I can go ahead and jump in on that, Russ, if you want me to. I think, HB 81. That's the bill I would encourage everyone on this call to get behind. Let your legislator, no matter where you are, if they're Democrat or Republican, know how important it is. HB 81 was filed last year under the number 283. That is the bill to get us to net zero. I mean, that is going to be the big thrust. I know that once I get with Rep. Escamani, next week we'll be up in Tallahassee. I'll probably be signing on as a co-sponsor. I always check in with the sponsor before I do that, anything like that. But I think that is going to be one of the big thrusts of the Democratic caucus this year, is going to be that bill by Representative Escamani. I think it's one that's worthy of your support if you're listening to this and find yourself among like-minded individuals who believe and want to follow the science. I think that's a great place to start. There'll be more as we go through. We're still at a stage, you have to remember, session doesn't start till January. In fact, there have only been, I want to say, 40 bills filed in the House at this point, substantive bills. So given that fact, there'll be more coming. I can promise you that. I'm sure there'll be a bill banning fracking again. You know, we've done that for a number of years. There'll be some other things, but we'll have to just you know, we'll have to see as they come out. But that right now, as of the first 40 bills, that would be the one specifically that I would target to support vehemently.
And that was House Bill 81. Did it have
81.
Did it have
It did not. It was actually, we were talking about this before we came on. It was actually filed at 9:59 a.m. yesterday. So it has not been in existence that long. And usually there might be some lag time there. Representative Escamani already had that one in the can ready to fire out and get filed. So I would assume that there will be a Senate companion that gets filed sometime shortly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rep. Jenny.
We had a question from Linda Chiarello. Let me know if I said that wrong.
Okay, yes. Is this directed to anybody specific? Okay, let me go ahead. Linda Chiarello, and apologies for the mispronunciation. Linda asks, Collier County Commissioners and Naples City Council are opposing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers recommendations to protect beaches, back bays, and buildings in the future. A county commissioner said, let's plan the way we have always done with the help of science. Let's thank the corps for what they did, but it's not appropriate for Collier County. Has anybody had a chance to or knows of the corps proposal and why it might be dismissed without consideration? Or do any of you have an opinion on something like that happening? All right. Well, that one will have to be answered offline. We will try and get you that answer, Linda. We don't actually have any representatives based out of Collier on this call, but we can look into that off the call. Vern asks, and it looks like Professor Hsu may answer, how do you address the asymmetric causes of climate change? 100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions, yet the public is being asked to foot the bill for mitigation and adaptation.
I'm not familiar with that statistic.
Oh.
But I don't think it may be accurate in some technical way, but I don't think it's really representative of what's happening. Climate change is something we all contribute to. If you just think about transportation, that's more than a third of the emissions in the United States, and the vast majority of that is us driving our cars. So, I mean, the problem is all of us, not just a couple of corporations. Some are a little bit more carbon heavy than others, ExxonMobil, for example. But the problem with climate change, and why I think a carbon tax is the way to address it, is that we're all acting in ways that contribute to climate change. I know I drive more than I should. I could carpool a little bit more, but it's not really worth it for me. And it's not worth it for my neighbor or any of my other colleagues at Florida State. There are all kinds of things we do that, let me put that, there are all kinds of things we could do to reduce our carbon footprint, but it's not worth it. And I think we could be forgiven for like not doing some of these things if like what we're doing by ourselves is tilting at windmills, tilting at windmills. I think what we need is a broad set of incentives for people to act in a certain way, like a carbon tax. If it costs a little bit more to gas up, and by the way, just some kind of some perspective, if we had a carbon tax in the amount of $30 a ton, which is actually kind of on the low end of what we think it ought to be these days, but that would probably cause an increase in the price of gasoline of about 20 cents a gallon. You know, the price of gas has gone up 20 cents a gallon even in the last couple of months as we climbed out of COVID. So this is not like a high pain measure, but it is a high leverage measure. I'm going to try and tell this story quickly in the interest of time, but I think it's an important story. I lived in British Columbia when the province instituted a carbon tax. I wrote about it. I said stuff. I taught my students about it. I was also getting my house renovated, and our contractor, Dave, a real hard hat and lunch bucket kind of guy, came to me. He said, you know, as long as we're doing this, you might as well get your windows refitted, get a high efficiency boiler. And he gave me a whole list of other high efficiency, low carbon things. And he said this, and it blew my mind. He said, with the carbon tax coming on, you really ought to be thinking about these things, which, struck me as ironic because I'm supposed to know all about this stuff. Why did he know all about this stuff? It's because as a contractor, he had a whole bunch of people asking him, hey, there's a carbon tax. How does this affect the payback period for a high efficiency boiler? That's how a carbon tax is supposed to work. Everybody's supposed to feel it and do something about it because all of a sudden it's in their best interest to do it. So, this corporations, we can make corporations do the right thing, but I think we have to have incentives that apply to all of us.
Yeah,
So
I think you're making a very good argument for the economic point we were making earlier, to incentivize transitions to cleaner and more carbon friendly, individual life choices. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next question, unless Professor Molina or Matt. Okay, we're good. There's a question for Dr. Whitman. How is water pollution related to climate change, and why are oceans so important to solutions?
I'm glad you brought that up. I think, especially here in Florida, we so undervalue the oceans themselves. It's every school kid knows it's, over 2/3, actually 71% of the planet is covered with oceans. It's inconceivable that we would, here in Florida, where we could lose the Keys, the Everglades, and thousands of species that from sea level rise, which is already baked into the equations through our neglect. But people don't realize that 83% of all carbon cycles goes through the oceans, and that our climate itself is moderated by it. We talk about value, and we talked about the manatee, and the manatee is a sentinel of the seagrass community, and the seagrass community sequesters more carbon per square acre than almost any habitat out there. There are so many different ways the ocean provides services, and guess what? It provides it for free. If we had to put a price, not on our car, but on our next breath, our water to drink, or the plants that we live off of, we couldn't value that whatsoever. There has been federal legislation on ocean-based climate solutions, and they're still under consideration, and hopefully they'll get passed. But how does water pollution, everything from your algal blooms to pesticides and herbicide pollution and losses of fisheries, they're all intertwined.
So speaking of that, we do have a lot of red tide outbreaks, much worse than we've ever had in the history of Florida. A decade ago, you could count on one hand how many outbreaks you'd have in a decade.
Yes.
And now we can count we can't even count how many you're going to have in a week across the state anymore.
That's right.
So frequent. So what can we do to clean the cyanobacteria from our waterways? And this can go to anyone that wants to weigh in on it. Starting with Richard.
Well, I'm just going to say one word: nutrients. Okay, they're minus the transparency, sunlight, the thing that the algae need, whether, and it doesn't matter which harmful algal bloom we're talking about, red tide or macroalgae or cyanobacterium or filamentous algae. After light, there's nitrogen for marine algae and phosphorus for fresh water. And that all is derived from a mismanagement of our landscape and our industries, which ends up in our rivers and eventually our bays, estuaries, and oceans.
So what I heard was stop polluting with all
Yeah,
the phosphate and nutrient into the waterways.
You have to get down to the root causes. I have seen innumerable, we're going to bleach it, we're going to harvest it. It doesn't work, okay? From an economic or practical, the only way to stop it is through natural systems.
Thank you. Professor Treese, would you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting back to, I would just add, I would agree with everything that Dr. Whitman said. In addition to that, I would simply add that this is a huge public health emergency that this poses. Carenia brevis, which produces the brevetoxin, and red tide can travel up to 10 miles inland. And I think that from a messaging standpoint, that's something that probably should get out there, especially, I always say that we kind of dodged a bullet in the sense that we didn't have an outbreak, major outbreak during the worst part of COVID, because that would have aggravated a lot of the respiratory symptoms of people that suffered from COVID. So it's all intertwined, public health and the environment's intertwined. And I think that that is an important message to get out there.
Thank you. The next question, actually from a Jeff, and it looks like it's a two-parter. I'm combining two questions. How can we entice green businesses to come to Florida? And then as a part of that, how can the government, which I'm combining, how can the government create market-based incentives to encourage conservation? So get green businesses here and get businesses to conserve and be more thoughtful with their policy.
Who's that for, Russ?
Anybody that would like to answer. I think Professor Molina was first up on that one. Or Mayor Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think this relates to one that I was making before in the sense that there has to be space to, like unify incentives between people that are, like entrepreneurs in the general public interested in consuming that certain good. I think Florida definitely has a market for it. I do believe that there could be some things that could be further, like explore. So for instance, public-private partnerships in which you have a business that is based in conservation. So for instance, I can give you some examples that I've observed out in the West that somewhat work pretty effectively when it comes to unifying, like green-minded entrepreneurship with public interest for conservation. One of those examples will be Patagonia, right? So you have a company that basically exploits the characteristics of an area. It exploits the interest of the public in outdoor activities, and it basically makes a commitment for like that purpose. I think we do have that potential here. If you think, for instance, of companies that can exploit our exposure to the ocean, how important is marine wildlife here, and how you can basically align those interests of the general public here. Imagine like you were to promote, like a company that basically it's committed to save the ocean, right? It's committed to restore corals, it's committed to control algal blooms. I think that potential exists. Maybe like the state could make some investment in terms of like we're gonna lower your taxes for a certain amount of time if you basically commit to pursue that conservation interest. And I don't know, that could be a win-win situation. But this has happened in other places, and I think the raw material is right there in order to be exploited.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so as a business owner, largely I feel, economic incentives don't really work. You know, if a business has a customer base and there's a demand for a product in that area, they're going to come. The economic incentives are really just a bonus. The best thing we can do as governments, I think, is create a customer base for their products. If we have municipalities that are looking to expand solar rooftop panels or some other green product, and there's a push for it, that's what's going to really attract the businesses, is seeing that there's a community desire to go in a green direction. I think as long as the state is kind of sending a message that we're not looking to go that direction, that's really what's going to hold back businesses from investing in Florida. And then secondly, local businesses, I think it's almost the other way around. So many local businesses in Tallahassee are the ones carrying the flag, you know, moving to more sustainable products and really pushing the mission internally. I think it's almost, we need all of our local businesses to come together and unify and push the state to take action rather than ask the state to take our local businesses to take action.
Thank you. We're just about done. I would like to ask one more. We did kind of touch on it, so I'll ask you to be brief. But I do think it's an important question that I wanted to get a little bit of input on. And this is to Matlow. With Tallahassee having publicly owned utilities, did that help or hurt the transition to 100% renewable energy? I know in Hillsborough, we had TECO, who is our local energy provider, actively opposing us. What did you face, and what would you recommend to the big three on how to address that in other places with the big three?
Right. So yes, I think in the utility professional space, there's pushback. We had the same concerns in Tallahassee coming internally from our utility. You know, mostly worried about the cost to get there, the speed that we could get there, and what it would take to transition. But the big thing is people love their publicly owned utilities. We saw what happened at JEA and Jacksonville and the outrage that was shown there, because in Tallahassee, we call our utility your own utility, and the vast majority of people in Tallahassee want to see the transition. And at the end of the day, it's up to the elected officials to deliver. So while there's pushback, it's very doable because it's the right thing to do, and that's what people want to see. And I think when we saw these preemptions start coming out, they didn't touch publicly owned utilities. You know, they let what we're transitioning to stand. So I think we had to address internally, you know, some of those concerns, and it's going to be an ongoing process to get there. By the time, how quickly do we retire natural gas generators? Do we take them offline early? You know, we put in a 20 megawatt solar farm followed by a 40 megawatt solar farm, and that's only a fraction of the energy we need as we really push to generate, and we watch as technology keeps up. But all of those concerns that were probably coming from other publicly owned utilities, I think are valid and will need to be navigated in any community. But I think the thing about demand, again, is the quicker we get there and the quicker we get more buy-in from public utilities and hopefully investor-owned utilities, the quicker the products that we need to implement the goals will come online and create a market for it. So I think the biggest thing is just to keep pushing internally. And again, it's, if you're honestly following the will of the voters in your community, I think it's an easy thing to accomplish.
So everybody, talk to your local representatives and tell them you want to see a clean energy program and move away from fossil fuel infrastructure. All right, we are closing the questions period. I'm going to allow any of the panelists, and we are getting close to short on time. If any of the panelists would like to make closing remarks, they are welcome to do so. I want to thank everybody for being here, which I will do formally. If any of you would like to make closing remarks, we can do that now.
Well, I got my camera on. I just want to thank all the panelists, the professors, really the people who are teaching us the best practices, Representative Jenne, Representative Escamani, all the people at our state government that are carrying the way. And I think it was mentioned earlier, we just need more people to run for office that care about the right things. It's difficult to put your name on the ballot. It's hard work, but the reward to really be able to deliver transformational change for the community or the planet, I think, you could put that up against anything. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to continue the fight for clean energy.
Thank you. Whoever wants to go next.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I was just going to say briefly that that the only reason that change is possible is with widespread popular support. So I think that outreach and changing public opinion is everything. And I think that just keeping up the good fight is very encouraging seeing that tonight.
Thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, just Russ, thank you for the opportunity of being here and to be here, the invitation, everyone for listening, and especially to the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida. This is my last session. It's going to be my 14th and final year in the legislature. And thank you for all the work we've been able to do together and the good things that happen, because so often in these we talk about the negatives that are happening, but we were able to pull off some good things. So thank you to you guys. I appreciate everything you do and the tireless efforts.
Thank you, Rep. Jenny. Are you at liberty to say what the next thing up is going to be?
It's going to be local. It's going to be local. I'm going to announce here in a couple of weeks, or in about a month or so. But it's going to be local, and it's going to be a couple of years off. But it won't be right in 2022. But look, that's one of the reasons making this decision. One of the reasons why ultimately the decision I'm going to make is so I can stay involved in policy and be able to have an impact on this stuff, whether it be at the state level or down here in Broward County.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate you.
Of course. Adam, or the Honorable Hattersley.
Thank you again to everybody and everyone on the panel and to the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida. We talked about a lot of great things today. I saw in the comments there's a lot of great stuff. The way we make these changes is through the ballot box. I know you guys all know that. I know we all know that. So we have to keep pushing, keep doing what we're doing, register voters, get people excited. And I know it sounds almost trivial, but we can use tactics that the other side has used to win. Use simple arguments, keep it top level, and appeal to your emotions. That's it. And get people to the ballot box to vote. We're not going to change any of these policies till we change that behavior at the ballot box. So thanks again for having me. And just like Mayor Pro-Tem said, it's scary to put your name on a ballot to run, but sometimes there's nobody else. So take that plunge. Worst case is you meet a lot of new people, making out a lot of new. So thanks again for having us, and great job to the Environmental Caucus.
Thank you, Representative Hattersley. And I will give him one last plug. The book Accidental Politician is fantastic. There it is. It really, really is. You can get it on Amazon, or you can give him a call directly. You can dig his number up. So we have Professor Hsu, and would you like to say anything before we close?
I'd like to echo the thanks that have been offered to Sawgrass and to DECF, and I'd like to thank Representative Jenne, outgoing, for his service to the state of Florida. I'm a professor, and I try and stay above the political fray. I certainly make a big effort to do that in the classroom, but there's no way around it. At least on climate, I'm afraid there's just nothing redeeming about the Republican Party. It's moving in the wrong direction. We had actually good Republicans in the state, in Congress anyway. Carlos Curbelo from the Keys, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, Francis Rooney. They all cared about climate change, and they're all gone. And what's troubling is that those people in the Republican Party in Congress are disappearing. They're not going in the right direction. So yes, the ballot box, and get out the vote and help register people. I've tried to do my best to do that, sir. I think this is an all hands on deck project. Thanks for your contribution to this effort, all of you.
Professor Molina, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just want to echo all the previous comments. Thank you so much for inviting me and be able to listen and contribute to this dialogue. I think I agree with most of what I said before. And I just wanted to reiterate that conservation and entrepreneurship and any other activity you have in mind, they're not mutually exclusive. There is room for improvement in all directions. And I think that's something that is key. And the only like group that is gonna move this agenda forward, meaning how can we get more green businesses moving forward? How can we increase the amount of conservation that is done in the state, is if there is enough public interest. That's where these things move forward. So yes, go out and vote and state your preferences in your community, and that will create change.
Thank you. Dr. Whitman?
Yes, again, thanks to everyone that came to the forum, and thanks to sponsors, as everyone has said. I think this is more than just a issue of our generation. It's an issue of all our future generations. In fact, it ranks up there with the Civil Rights Act, the Air Quality Act, the Water Act, but it's more than that. And so we really don't have a choice but to support this, our futures and the futures of our fellow creatures have to have this as an existential battle. Thank you.
Thank you, and I could not have said that better. Really bringing it home. So thank you all of the panelists. Thank you organizers that have helped us put this together. I specifically wanted to thank Lisa for helping me and us organizing this. This was her baby originally, her idea. So I do want to thank her for that. Thank you to all of our partners that have shared this and supported us, and also to the attendees that gave us your time. We are going to be planning a deep dive into environmental racism as our next item, and how environmental injustice hurts frontline and the disability community predominantly and first. They are the canaries in our coal mine, and we need to bring that to more awareness than has previously been done. And they're ignored. So that will be the next item. And I do want to say, in case we have been fighting for these issues of inclusivity inside the caucus, inside all environmental organizations. We did reach out to people of color and to women. These were the speakers that were available to us across the state. And we thank them for that, even though the optics may not look great on first glance. But we do have that equity in mind when we are talking about solutions. So thank you everybody for coming. I'm gonna let Ms. Straley close, but thank you so much for putting this together, having us, and tuning in. And Lisa, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank everyone so much for coming out. Thank you so much to all of our attendees. Thanks so much to everyone who bought a ticket this evening. And thanks so much to Russ, who was able to moderate this for us, because that's not anything I had any experience with. I'm just an organizer, so I just like to bring folks together. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, who are all way smarter than I am. Thank you guys so much for coming. If you guys are committed to this work, and if you're still logged on, I assume that you're committed to this work, please help us make the long-term investment we need to actually pass any of the solutions that we talked about this evening. We are looking for long-term recurring donations, so that those will benefit both us, both Sawgrass Progressives and the Democratic Environmental Caucus. We're focused specifically on providing our elected officials that support they said that they needed. So thank you guys so much. If you haven't donated yet, please do so. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. So have a great day, everybody on Facebook. Have a great day, all of the participants. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the other side. Let's go vote on some Republicans.